it's a scheme that I've seen some guys before.
Well, we'll do this. Yep, we are recording this. Okay, welcome to the Public Safety Committee. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Rivera.
Felix Rivera.
Christopher Thompson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Crystal Kennedy.
John Weddleton. Cameron Perez-Rodillo.
Dean Gates in the council.
Thank you, Dean. Do we have anybody online? Okay, I think Suzanne is going to try to call in at some point or otherwise reach out. Okay, well, hopefully everyone had a chance, we've been joined by my co-chair, Mr. Peterson. I hope people had a chance to take a tour of the new APD headquarters this morning. I know I had a chance to go there. It was very impressive, and maybe Chief Dahl wanted to talk a little bit about it in his report. So we'll start with that, actually. We start with the general APD report. Do you guys have a PowerPoint? Okay. So if you want to just come and take a seat, Chief,
Sure.
And anyone else. And so,
Thanks.
for those who maybe missed the public safety meeting in May, our hope is to do these regularly every 2 months. We'll have a general update from the APD and AFD. So the next one will be in September. If you have questions you want to have them research in advance, please either email the chiefs or email us, and we'll forward them. Actually, please email us so we have a sense of what we want to talk about at these meetings. But Chief, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you, sir. So Justin Dahl, APD. Thanks to everybody that came this morning and visited us at our new downtown location. I really appreciate that, and had a good time talking with everybody and kind of walking through the facility. We're almost done with construction there. There's a couple minor little things that are yet to be done, but the bulk of it is complete. We're going to begin moving detectives into the building next week. That's kind of the final phase of our move, and that will probably take several weeks to complete. Sometime towards the end of that, we will also have patrol start working out of there, probably towards the end of that detective move in. And about the time that takes place, we hope to open that as our front counter location, so that'll be our public point of contact. So any member of the public that needs to conduct business with APD can come downtown to that location. It'll be all set up to receive them. So we hope to see that all unfold over the next few weeks. As probably most of you realize by now, I'm usually optimistic with my timelines. I am pushing really hard for that to be the case, but we'll see how it really goes. As far as a PowerPoint presentation, we did bring one today. We started to prepare it, and we were going to do it in the same format that we brought last time. However, it dawned on us that we were presenting the information in a quarterly basis, and with this quarter being incomplete, it skewed it. So the report for the current quarter looked like there were drastic reductions in things that maybe there aren't. So we decided to wait till next time and present it in a continuum and maintain that continuum of quarterly presentation. I think that if we change sort of the frame of reference every time we bring you information, it's going to be really hard to follow. So we want to try to make it consistent, but that's why we didn't bring it today. But other than building move-in stuff, just kind of generally things that are happening around APD. Obviously, it's midsummer. We have a growing presence downtown as a result of moving the headquarters. So we've been able to push sort of our traditional downtown presence, which is typically school resource officers who are on their summer break, and have them be on bicycles, spend a lot more time in parks and on trails around town, not just in the core downtown district. We've been talking about maybe having foot patrol spend a little bit of time in the Midtown area throughout the rest of the summer, so we're working on that. But we just want to try to continue to expand that visible physical presence and face-to-face interaction with visitors and residents all over town. So that's underway. We also have some ongoing crime suppression efforts, some things that we've done recently. We did another enforcement detail with a local retailer, and I believe it was Fred Meyer Diamond this time, but I might be mistaken. that one didn't receive quite as much attention, frankly, because we didn't have as much activity. So that actually, to us, seems like that there's some measure of success. The stores are reporting to us that there has been a decline in some of the theft and other activities. So we feel like that's having an impact, and we're going to continue to do it and rotate it around town. But I think there's a little bit of good news buried in there that we're not seeing. The first couple times we did that, it was like a 10-hour free-for-all, and they couldn't hardly finish one task before something else fell into their laps, and that was not the case this time. So that's good. We have some upcoming crime suppression efforts that I can't make public at this time, but are going to be happening all across the city and involve many of our state and federal partners. And we'll be happy to report on that to the public as soon as those are complete. Patrol is continuing its rollout of the rollout's complete, but they're continuing to kind of settle into the new patrol boundaries. We're having more and more community councils get visits from their beat officers, and that is not surprisingly very popular. And there's something else I was about to say. What did I forget?
Chief, I have a question while you're
Please.
thinking about that, about the community councils. I was approached by someone at the Northeast Community Council, and I think it's something that we have spoken about before, but Northeast Community Council is, I want to say 30, maybe 40,000 people, 30,000 people, also happens to be one of the higher crime areas in Anchorage, so it is much, much larger and has much more serious crime concerns than some other community councils. And so this person asked me, well, do we get the same 2 police officers that another, much smaller, less crime challenged community council get? And what is the answer to that?
So the answer is no, actually. And in fact, some of the smaller, because we all know the community councils are not uniform in size or geography, all around the bowl, and so they're not equally staffed. So some of the smaller community councils might be grouped together in one patrol beat. So there'll be one set of officers covering that beat that are responsible for all of those. And then a larger community council district might have more officers sort of permanently assigned to it than one of those smaller ones. So we don't, we're not necessarily, even though we're assigning officers to the beats, and the beats are sort of generally based on the community council boundaries, we don't limit our staffing to that. We still base our staffing sort of on the volume of need for each kind of area of town. And so if we have an area that we know receives a lot of calls for service or has a lot of issues, it will generally have more officers assigned to it than an area of town that doesn't have as many.
So let me just restate that, or ask again. So more officers, I knew that more officers would be going on patrol there, but is it still the case that the dedicated number of officers will still be 2 that will come and talk to the community council? Or how is that going to work?
2 per shift. Okay.
6 around the clock.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can hear Captain Case, but he's saying 2 per shift, so 6 around the clock. So that part is the same as everywhere else. And again, that's, the purpose of that is to mean that consistency of contact. It doesn't mean that those are the only 2 officers that are going to be working on issues there. It just means that they're going to be designated as the primary points of contact. We, as we sort of continue to refine this process, that's something that we could change if we felt like it was beneficial in some way. But I guess I would just encourage residents to not think of like, oh, we're limited in service because these are our 2 primary points of contact. There's a lot of resource that you're not seeing that's being deployed there. But we want to have that consistency of that face-to-face contact. And if it's 10 people instead of 2, you're starting to kind of go back to what it was before, where you're not having consistency. So I think we probably want to minimize the number of people that are designated as primary points of contact for that reason.
Okay. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a sort of a community council process question. So recently I got contacted by someone at Spinard Community Council who had a safety sort of meeting coming up, and they wanted an APD officer there if possible. So I emailed you, and you connected me with Captain Case, who is then going to contact the person who emailed me. If there are assigned officers, does it make sense? is there a list of those people? Should we just be reaching out to them as part of our sort of building with that, the people who are local, or is it best to keep asking you those questions?
That's a great question. So ultimately, the goal is to have built into the department's website that information. So I can say, okay, I'm a resident of Rabbit Creek and I want to know who the officer is assigned to my beat. I can go to the department's webpage, I can look that up, I can see contact information, email, phone number for those officers, and reach out that way. And what we found in Anchorage, but what's been sort of rediscovered over and over again every time it's studied, is a lot of issues that especially neighborhoods experience. When residents want to report that, they'd actually rather report it to somebody they know, and they're willing to wait a few days to do that if I'm on my days off or something like that. And so if we have that contact information available, they can reach out to that officer and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something when you come back to work, and then make that contact and make a report that way. You know, we're still not obviously encouraging reporting via email or over the phone, but at least you'll have the ability to reach out and make that contact. So that's the direction we're headed. We're doing it in, baby steps basically, and we're not there. Frankly, part of that is a total overhaul of our webpage, which is, it needs it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Chief? Did you have another thing you wanted to talk about?
I thought I did, but I may have just imagined it.
Well, I have one other question. You're talking about the retail detail or the operations there. I have a major retailer in my district who I won't mention by name, but they were interested in becoming a partner, doing one of those operations. How exactly, what's the process by which they do so?
I think just expressing an interest. So if you want to forward their contact info or their request to me, I'll connect them with Captain Curl, who's the Crime Suppression Division Commander.
How do you spell the last name again?
It's Curl, Kerle. And if you, like I said, if you email me, I'll get everybody connected on the same chain. But he can work that down through his division, because that's typically who the units in his division are typically the ones that execute those. So.
Okay.
But yeah, we're always looking for new partners and new locations, so we would be happy to do that.
Great. Mr. Barber.
So they recently, the last vestiges of SB 91 went away, roughly. And does that change any of your operations?
It does. It doesn't necessarily change the way that we do day-to-day business on the ground, but it does change sort of the outcome of a lot of that operation. So, for example, we believe, based on the briefings we've gotten from State of Alaska Department of Law, that it should change the way that bail hearings are conducted, the way that bail is structured. Obviously, there were actual statutory changes that sort of shifted up and down some of the different criminal penalties. That actually does have an impact on what we do operationally. Something that maybe would have been a citation could now be an arrest, those kinds of things. But we've been working with Department of Law to make sure that we understand what those changes are, and that gets pushed out to all of the officers that are actually out working the street, and of course detectives too, because some of those were in the more serious violent crime and sex assault categories.
Yeah, Mr. Welcome.
So where you would give a citation before, that's fairly quick. And now if you arrest them, you have to take them down to the jail, process them, and it takes hours.
Hopefully not, but yeah, sometimes.
Okay. So that
It
it
could
could
have
make
an
a big
impact.
difference then.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you in September unless something else flares up. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thanks.
So is there someone here from the fire department? Please identify yourself for the record.
Cleo Hill, Fire Marshal.
Thank you. Do you have a PowerPoint?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't have a whole lot to report, as I'm just filling in for Chief Patrick while she's on vacation. I do want to give you a little bit of information on what's going on around the town fire-wise. Tonight, or this morning, it was really great to wake up and not have a new wildland fire to respond to. We are standing by with forestry on the MLK fire. There's about 41 people on location right now. Most of those, 30 of those are Department of Forestry wildland people. We have a crew up from Idaho with a commander from Nevada. who is running the operation right now. I expect they will still be in there for another 2 to 3 days unless this humidity really suppresses some of the hot spots that are still there. Eventually, we'll be able to get Mr. Littleton and his group in. Right now, our main concern is, of course, the falling trees. But we are identifying a path that we can go through to show your folks. We also have people on standby at 100th in Minnesota. A couple of days ago, we had a large fire between City Church and Diamond Estates. That area too is filled with black spruce and peat. Very hard to put the fire out in the peat. So we're on location digging up, trying to get those hot spots. Yesterday morning, we had a fire off of Elmore and 68th in the BLM area. We're doing a check there today also. Once again, that's black spruce and peat. That fire's pretty interesting. We're lucky it didn't travel too far, but it is a burned area in the middle of a spruce and peat bog with no trails to it, no paths, no evidence of vehicles or even animal trails going through. So we know there was no lightning. That possibly could have been caused by a flare or some type of fireworks that was thrown from a vehicle into the bush. We're not able to tell what the cause of that fire is. Going back to the MLK fire, we've had 3 investigators from Division of Forestry and our fire investigator from the fire department. They have located an area of origin. They are not able to identify the exact event that took place. However, around that area, there are some camping, evidence of camping. There's also evidence of wire burning. We found some flares. We found lots of unburned cigarette material. I think we can say that we're positive this was a human-caused event. Whether that event was accidental or intentional, that has not yet been determined. I do want to give a good shout out to Officer Fuchs with APD. Without his help and eyewitness information, it would have been much harder for us to find an area of origin. He came upon the fire, he was able to identify it right away. Unfortunately, we didn't get to speak with him immediately after he reported the fire. It took a day or two. But with his help, we were able to identify it without the help of Division of Forestry. So that was pretty good for us. Budget-wise, this event has taken a pretty good hit on our budget. We'll have more information on that later. I understand from the Division of Forestry that it is costing them $100,000 a day for this event. Hopefully they will get some reimbursement from the feds, but that's all up in their area of expertise.
Any questions? Mr. Wells?
I don't know if this is a question, this is just something that's happened recently. At my business, they put this lovely landscaping on Spenard Road, and they put little bark chips, kind of fibrous, and it started on fire. And we didn't, actual flames, and we didn't see a cigarette butt or anything there. We assumed it was someone flicked a cigarette. Is this something that happens?
It is this year. Typically in Anchorage, we don't have the high enough heat or the humidity's too low. That doesn't usually happen. But this season, because of this fabulous weather that we're having, the humidity is extremely low, the heat is high, the heat's dried everything out, so you can actually have a pretty good fire from a cigarette burn. Along the highways, that's especially common. With the bark chips or the sawdust shaving, if they're not regularly kept wet in this type of humidity or this type of weather, they too will ignite.
Interesting event.
Yeah.
Mr. Gates?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Barbara here, I have a question about the fire investigations once the greenhouse and I sort of get from what I've heard that that Carlick and 20th fire on the Chester Creek Greenbelt was investigated by our investigators at AFD. But the MLK fire, the investigation responsibilities with the Division of Forestry. So where do we, how is that determined?
Okay.
Who gets assigned primary investigation?
So once the fire department calls out the Division of Forestry, they then have the responsibility to determine the cause of the fire. The Gamble Street fire, they had an Division of Forestry had an investigator come out. I don't know what that determination was. We sent our guy out to get a faster determination, but his determination is not the official one since Division of Forestry was called out. On the MLK fire, once again, it's now under the jurisdiction of the Division of Forestry, and anytime they respond and take over an event, it is their responsibility to do the investigation.
It doesn't matter which property it is.
No. Luckily, DOF doesn't do structure fires, so we can get those done pretty rapidly.
Thanks. Any other questions for the chief? Ms. Salto?
Thank you. Excuse me. There was a fire reported via constituents along the Campbell Creek Greenbelt, but as we've inquired about it, there's no record of it, but there was definitely a fire truck, there was definitely a hotshot crew. So what information might we need to better find out what happened?
So are you referring to the inquiry about the fire at 95th and King?
Well, that's not it though, because
Okay.
I know like the area the picture came from, but so it just seems to be like something that obviously was really smoky. People believe they saw a fire, but we don't have any record. Like we're having a hard time tracking it now.
Okay, so we need a date, we need the time, and we need a really good location. Using that 95th Street fire as an example, folks were reporting it in a green belt as a wildfire, and in actuality it ended up being at 95th and King, and it was a vehicle fire. We can't search in our database, we can't search without a good address.
So location is really key.
Location is
Okay.
absolutely key.
Great. That's helpful. Thank you.
So, I guess it's a question for you, but also Ms. Zalato, I understand you're working on a new ordinance related to wildfires in our green spaces. Are you, Fire Marshal, are you working on that directly as well?
I am.
Okay. Is the administration, so maybe Ms. Zalato, you could update us here. So right now, what's the status of that, and where's the administration on that as well?
So we're all going to convene and have an opportunity to go through it, and then we'll get it in a first public vetting and work session at the committee on policies meeting next Wednesday.
Okay. Interesting. I do wonder if perhaps, I mean, I'll just express, if next month it makes sense to do it in public safety meeting, I think that would be, if the timing works out. I think there's this, I understand why it's been centered around the homelessness discussion, but really it's broader than that, right? And what we're hearing is these wildfires don't just originate from homeless camps. They come from people flipping cigarettes. They come from lightning in some cases. They come from, other things, automobile fires and that kind of thing. And so if it makes sense to do another meeting, I'd like to see it here as well, if we need it. And is that the one that was set last night for public hearings now in August? Why? The 7th, okay. So that's pretty far out. I mean, what it means basically is that any new tool we might be able to develop probably will miss this summer in terms of the fire season. Unless, who knows, maybe we'll be an extended drought through the end of September. So, knock on wood, we're not. Mr. Constant, did you want
Just that it's set for public hearing on the 6th, the next public safety meeting is on the 7th. So if the timeline holds, we would need a special meeting of the public safety committee for just work session. So it's one or the other.
Probably makes sense. Okay. Any other questions for the fire marshal? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right, next, we are going to have a discussion about HB 79 and AR 2019-183 regarding defined benefit pension options for state and muni peace officers and firefighters. Now, I believe that's from Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Constant as well. Ms. LaFrance unfortunately could not be here today. Is there anyone from the administration to talk about it? No.
If I could, the item isn't even here before us. We don't have a copy of it. So,
Okay.
maybe Dean has it over there.
No, I think that's yours.
Okay,
Okay, well, let's move on then to the bicycle theft discussion, and yeah, we'll loop back to that discussion either later time or later date. All right, so Mr. Constant, you brought something to talk about bicycle theft.
There's actually a number of constituents or citizens who have emailed you and reached out to me about having a discussion about this.
Okay.
I don't know if any of them are here. Doesn't look like it. This meeting is an odd time and place. But, so, probably one of my number one pet peeves is the rampant thefts of bicycles that we have going on in the municipality, all over the municipality. It's an incredible phenomenon that we're witnessing. Just yesterday, I saw 2 people riding on their bike with a separate bike with the seat taken off. You know, it's a really nice bike they were riding away with, and it's like the most common, or one of the most common petty theft problems we have in the city. But if you aggregate that petty theft, it's a massive perpetration against our community. And I understand by deploying our public safety resources where the fires or where the problems are the hottest or biggest, this tends to be a low-grade priority. But, however, I would like to see a working group begin to tackle this overall problem and look towards tactical strategies in which we can increase enforcement, good policy, incentivizing the public to do their part. And so I, for purposes of discussion, have published for you all or printed for you all a document from the U.S. Department of Justice on bicycle thefts and kind of problem oriented policing, how we can start to look at this problem. I know the Department of Health would have liked to have been here because they actually have a small grant that they're about to operate and start handing out bike locks to certain people to increase the number of locks in the community. But if you pay attention to this problem, we actually have people wandering around town with sawzalls in their backpack where they're just walking up and hacking away, like right up to business front doors, hit out their sawzall, takes a minute, get it, and it gets away before there's any kind of response, and there's nothing you can do to stop it without a concerted approach. And so I guess having it on the agenda is great. There were a number of people in the community that made this request. They obviously didn't show up, but I am hoping for some assistance through this committee, as maybe a subcommittee working with APD, Department of Health, and some other folks here to begin having a strategy for how to break down this problem. Because to me, one of the most offensive things to do is to go through our green belts and witness a mobile chop shop that continues to move whenever. And I understand from a policing perspective, it's the bottom line is evidence is king. There's not a lot you can do without evidence, and so we have a systemic problem that we need to pay attention to.
Is there anyone from the community here that wants to talk about this? Or anyone from the health department?
The health department apologizes. They were planning to.
Well, I mean, yeah, this meeting's at an unusual date. We usually do it in the first week of the month, but because of the 4th of July holiday, we moved the meeting. Is there any discussion on this? I mean, we don't have an ordinance before us. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, I read a decent amount of this article that we forwarded from the Justice Department. And one of the first things that jumped out at me is that the percentage of bikes that are stolen is 4 times higher than the percentage of cars that are stolen. It said that 4.7% of all bikes across the country get stolen at some point. And so, obviously, we're not the only place that has a problem with this. And that even estimated that over 50% of the bikes are stolen aren't even reported stolen. And so the percentage of stolen bikes could actually be more than 4 times higher than the park thefts. And the reasons for stealing them, sometimes it's like a joyride, but sometimes they're stolen to trade for other items, which might be cash or possibly drugs. And sometimes somebody just said, well, hey, I need such and such a bicycle. Can you go out and steal me this bicycle because I know somebody who wants to buy this bicycle for X amount of money or whatever. But even when the police department finds them, their problem is there's many times no identifying marks on the bikes. And so it's hard to prove ownership. And we've talked about this in the past, that you need a serial number or you need a receipt from the place that you bought the bike. And so it sounds like, well, we should be able to stop bike theft. That doesn't sound like a difficult problem, but actually it seems like there's quite a number of angles that we're going to have to work on to get to a point where we can reduce the bike thefts and maybe get some of the bikes back to the original owners. And I see the chief's up at the table. Maybe he has some information he'd like to talk to us about. Thank you. Chief. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, kudos to Captain Case for anticipating this discussion and coming preloaded with information. So I think it might be interesting to mention that in 2016, AP received 796 bike theft reports, 632 in 2017, 538 in 2018, and so far this year, with about half the year past, we've received 100. So those numbers look like they're declining, but I suspect there's probably a healthy component of people not reporting. And if you look at the DOJ sort of suggested strategy that Mr. Constant forwarded to us, 2 of the things that are sort of heavily recommended in there are, of course, educating the public to record their serial numbers and then report those serial numbers when bikes are stolen. So I would just encourage that as different options are being considered, those 2 things be sort of heavily emphasized, because if you just look at data only, it looks like it's those numbers are declining, but I suspect it's probably just a lack of reporting, or at least there's a component of that built into it.
Yeah. Any other questions for the chief on this? I mean, that is a pretty dramatic decline. I hope it isn't attributable entirely to lack of reporting. It does sort of track with some other crime trends, right? Crime started to spike in, I think, 2014, 2015, up to 2016, and then by the summer of 2017, it started to fall again.
Correct.
Interesting that, well, anyway, the state law changes didn't go into effect until 2016, so it was sort of maybe not completely correlated. So, maybe it's encouraging. Maybe there actually are fewer bike thefts, but I don't know. Anecdotally, it doesn't seem to be the case. But I'm not as plugged into the bicycle community as some of our other members are. I mean, do you have any comment on that, Chris?
Well, my suspicion is that there is a strong component of people who've just given up. How many bikes? I know one person that had 4 bikes stolen over the course of last year. And they just gave up. They don't buy bikes anymore. They don't own bikes anymore. And their kids just don't have bikes. And so I could show you reports that I receive on a daily basis of bike thefts happening. And so if it's largely a day, that exceeds the number that are reported. And so I'm going to continue operating on the fact that it's happening all the time, especially if I'm seeing people riding around with multiple bikes. Maybe they're stealing them from people who stole them, and so the chain of who actually owns what is very muddy. But what I'm hoping for then, and I don't want to make it Captain Case back there because he has a pretty heavy load already, but it's someone I could work with on your team, someone I'll get from the health department's team, and a group that I can start to convene and have a conversation about tactics and measures and maybe some data points so we can start to understand this.
From you, Chief, or any of your officers. So we did pass that ordinance that regarding the removal of serial numbers. Is there any other legal change you see that might, facilitate stopping this challenge? And also, we had reports, and I know as we do a walkthrough, basically these open air kind of chop shops in some of the camps. Is that still something that our officers are observing?
We're sort of having a little sidebar here, but I think that the removal of identification marks was definitely helpful. I think when it comes to the pieces and parts, that's a little bit more challenging because those items are typically not serialized. And so I'm not sure that there is an additional, legal adjustment that can be made. My personal belief is that educating the public to record serial numbers on their valuables, including bicycles, and then making reports when those things go missing is probably the number one thing we could do. I tend to suspect that there is some underreporting happening, although Mr. Dunbar's correct that this does track somewhat that some of the other crime figures that we've seen where there has been some decline over the last couple of years. And Mr. Constant and I have talked about this before. My first question when I hear, my bike keeps getting stolen, it's like, well, how many times did you report that, and did you ever record the serial number? And often the answer is no. And so, helping people understand that that's very useful, and it's not guaranteed that we'll recover their bicycle if that happens, but it's certainly helpful. And that can be something that if an officer finds a location, whether it's in a camp or it's at a house or some other place where there are a lot of bicycle parts and bicycle chains, and you find a couple that have been reported stolen, that could be the probable cause. You need to start digging a little deeper into what else is going on there, and so those things are all very helpful.
So the felony threshold is $750, is that right?
I think so. Yeah,
$750, and there are bikes that are worth several thousand now. So we are talking about felonies in some cases. Do you have the staff or the inclination to do any kind of sting operations, or do you not want to talk about it? I mean,
sorry, if I might interrupt. What I would really like, rather than us to kind of shoot from the hip right here, is to convene a working group that comes up with a really strategic approach that then can come back here and talk about potential law changes, potential policy changes, potential system improvements, and potential community outreaches.
I think that's a good suggestion, and I think before we even consider whether or not we wanted to commit some additional resource, having some better information about the nature of the problem would be helpful.
Okay. I think I am hesitant to set up a subcommittee. I think what John and I did on the bear, unless there are more than 3 people that want to work on this specifically, I think what John and I did on the bear ordinance worked pretty well, where we basically did what you described. We got with the administration and we had these detailed sidebar discussions, but there were only 2 of us, so we didn't require a subcommittee. It did require, making public notice.
I'm fine being in a group smaller than 4. I would love if anybody is interested in working on this some assistance, Crystal. Thank you. That way, it's not just me when something comes forward.
Okay. If you do, okay. And if a 4th person decides they want to be involved directly in that, let me know, and then I'll set this up.
I think 3 is ample, and then we'll reach out to some folks, health department, police department, and some of the user groups, and really begin a robust dig into what we can do, what's happening.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, another thing that I saw was in this article was they said that if people lock their bikes up differently, they might reduce the number of thefts. Just locking your seat or locking one of the tires, they said, didn't seem to be that much of a deterrent. But if you had the lock around the seat and the tire both, that greatly reduced the chance that somebody would target your bike to be stolen. However, if somebody's driving around looking to steal bikes and they got bolt cutters or whatever, they're going to steal your bike if it's one that they want. And part of the reason I was a couple minutes late today, because I had to give a friend of mine a ride to his doctor's appointment because he had his bike stolen. And he had a really nice chain type of and a nice lock that you just see they had, obviously took bolt cutters, and that thing was gone in 20, 30 seconds probably, you know? So.
When I was a, yeah, I'll say briefly, when I was a juvenile delinquent in Fairbanks, running around with other juvenile delinquents, the chain locks, they're basically not a lock. They're extremely easy to get through.
Well, here's how far it's gone though. The U-locks and their cable locks used to be, whoa, chains are no good, so use the U-locks and cable locks. Well, the Sawzall will get through just about any one of those things. So now what people are doing, they're buying industrial chain that's this thick, and then they're having it plastic sealed to create an additional layer of protection, and they're getting a specialized lock that can't just be cut at a point. You know, you would have to hack through inches of steel to get it, and this thing weighs 30 pounds. But if you have a $4,000 bike or a $2,000 bike, there's no other insurance you can get. And so it's back to chain. It's just this incredible chain that, you know, is, you could really use it to defend yourself if someone came after you to get your $4,000 bike, because it would be a deadly weapon. That's how far people are going in this. You have to have at least 2 locks. Oh God, it's kind of insane. And that's why there's some systematic level to this that's beyond just kind of the street level, kind of moving bikes for the trading of sex trade or street drugs. There's something else. We just don't have evidence of it yet, and I'm hoping we can get to it. Because if you can get through a chain that's like that, and it still does happen, you're organized.
Okay, any other final parting thoughts? Okay, we'll move on. Old business, we don't have any. Audience participation, would anyone like to speak about anything public safety related? Not? Yeah, Al?
I just have one comment.
Could you identify yourself for the record?
Al Milsbaugh, University Air Community Council. At times, it's hard to hear you guys, so
Yeah.
if you could speak up, it makes it easier for us out here to understand.
Thank you, Al. Yeah, I think we will try to, we moved up from downstairs up to here. The homelessness committee has a microphone, and perhaps we'll try to get one at our next meeting. With that, unless there's any other comments from the assembly? Okay, it's a short one today. We're adjourned.